Wanted and Wonder. Please welcome David Hoberman and Todd Lieberman.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you guys so much for coming out on a Saturday afternoon. Whenever I have people as accomplished as you are, I actually like to go back to the beginning and ask, what was your first job in this business? You know, when you came to Hollywood, hoping to be a producer.
I dropped out of UCLA one quarter to go,
Oh,
and my father said,
oh sorry, microphone.
"Oh, is it not on?" Hello. And he said, "Fine, but you're going to have to get a job." So I got a job in the ABC mailroom.
You're kidding.
Prospect and Townley. Lived in the marina, so that was quite a trek. And then my second job was a chauffeur for Sherman Hemsley.
Yeah, Mr. Jefferson?
Yeah.
Was he doing Jeffersons at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was he cool? Don't break my heart.
He was totally cool, but he was on some kind of drug on every episode.
So he was really cool.
I mean, you want the history?
No, I was just thinking, like, you literally started in the mailroom. That's kind of like the legend.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What about for you?
My answer is, what job didn't I do? I was a bartender, I was a bouncer, I was a caterer, I sprayed cologne.
He still does that.
Yeah, on other people. The first real job I had was working at a publicity firm, and it was such a small shop that we were kind of all doing everything. So we were doing international publicity for CBS soap operas, none of which I'd ever seen. But the guy who ran the publicity firm said to me, "I want you to help to produce this event that I'm running called the Catholics in the Media Awards." My last name's Lieberman. So we ended up doing this whole event at the Beverly Hilton, and we got Carol O'Connor and Cardinal Mahoney and Gregory Peck and Martin Sheen and all these people. And afterwards he said to me, he's like, "You're pretty good at this thing of organizing. You sure publicity's your thing?" And I said, "Yeah, I think you're right. It's not my thing." And then I switched.
That's amazing. So I want to start at the beginning with the Aeronauts. How did this story sort of find its way to you? And you know, I'm curious what attracts you to a story initially, but what made you see this as cinematic, other than the fact that it's, you know, beautiful?
I'm going to let Todd answer that.
You know, we're always looking for, David and I are always looking for stories that we just, this is going to sound cliche, but that we just absolutely fall in love with and need to make. And the reason, I think, part of the fact that our resume is a little bit all over the place is partly because that's our collective and individual taste, but it's also that we like different challenges in different areas. So Tom Harper, who had directed a miniseries called War and Peace based on the novel, which was exceptional, that we had watched, just kind of loved it and just thought he was exceptionally talented. And I had a general meeting with him, and there's a lot of people say, I've heard this before, which I totally disagree with, that what comes of general meetings is usually nothing, and I completely disagree with this. This was a general meeting that I had with Tom Harper, and he was pitching this idea of this flight from 1862 in this balloon called the Mammoth, and the 91-minute real-time up and down of what these two people went through. And he said he was working with his friend Jack Thorne. Now, David and I had hired Jack Thorne to write Wonder for us. And when he pitched that, I just kind of immediately latched onto it, both emotionally and specifically the idea of what would those technical challenges be on how to accomplish that. So there was a true emotional connection to these two people and what they needed to accomplish and what they meant to accomplish, but also kind of visualizing what would this thing look like and how in the world would we do it, and that was intriguing.
I would just say, just to answer your general question, you know, usually we tend to like stories that have a journey for at least one individual character. It's either that, all our movies have happy endings, because we like people to walk out of the theater happy, and we also like to be challenged. And so if something like same with Muppets. You know, how do you do that? And same with Aeronauts is how do you accomplish the sky and what that's going to look like? So.
Tom Harper actually has 2 great movies this year. He made a film I love called Wild Rose that actually he made it before, but it came out this year. But when you met with him, he had not made a feature, had he?
He did Women in Black 2. Yeah, it was a horror movie that he had done. And he'd done a few other independent movies, but nothing near the size or scope or scale of what this was meant to be, yeah.
So was it sort of a leap of faith, or he was just so convincing in that meeting?
Yeah, boy, it's hard to say. I mean, it's, David doesn't like when I say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. It's that same feeling of when you fall in love with someone or something, and you just, that you have blinders on, and it doesn't matter. Like, you're not even doing the analysis of, is it possible? Is it possible that this person can do it? You're just like, we need to make this movie with this person, and that was basically it.
And what don't I like about that? But I will say, too, the script was done when we came aboard. Tom was attached as the director. So we were really sort of invited onto it with Todd's hard work of getting us into it. So, by the way, can I just ask how many liked the movie?
We have to talk about this amazing cast, of course, led by Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones. Are they a package deal now?
I hope so. I mean, that would be great. You know,
I think they'll make other movies together.
Yeah.
it was kind of like the, in that grand tradition of Hollywood, like, wouldn't it be great to see those 2 again? And they were really the first 2 on our list of, if we were lucky enough to get Felicity and Eddie, that would be the ideal package. So we had heard that they wanted to work together again, and so we sent them each the script separately and didn't mention that the other one was getting it, with the hope that they would come to the idea themselves of, I'm going to text my friend and say, this would be great for you, and guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
And they were so perfect for the roles.
Perfect, yeah.
For the period, for everything.
And, you know, I was saying earlier that Felicity Jones is such a wonderful, versatile actress, but I don't think I've ever seen her as exuberant and sexy and alive as she is in this movie. And was that sort of the fun, letting her, like, sort of cut loose?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, go.
No,
No, seriously, you.
Just to see her do some of the things she does in this movie, and particularly that climb that she does, which I don't know, I think is one of the most extraordinary things I've seen on film. But yeah, she let loose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something that, one of the reasons she wanted to do the role was because of the physicality and this kind of performative aspect of it. And she did a lot of training for that. She did acrobatic training. She went to Germany to do gas balloon training. There's, not to do a ballooning lesson here because you guys just had one, but there's a difference between a hot air balloon and a gas balloon. Hot air balloon obviously is when heat goes up and you see the fire and the balloon rises because the heat's the hot air is lighter than the cold air. In a gas balloon, there's literally just helium. So what this was one big giant birthday balloon. And basically there are a handful of people in the world who pilot those kinds of balloons. And they don't do it in the UK and they don't do it in the US. They basically only do it in Germany. So Felicity traveled to Germany to do some helium balloon, gas balloon flight training. That mixed with, she basically did a majority of her stunts. So when there's that large vista shot of Eddie and Felicity going across the landscape of old London as the balloon just takes off, that's really Eddie and Felicity in the balloon, and that's really her climbing onto that hoop, sitting there 2,000 feet in the air as we're filming with helicopters and drones around. So she did a lot of that herself.
It's one of the few shots that was actually out there in the world and not on stage.
Well, yeah, I'm very curious about, like, really how you pulled this movie off, because I assumed, you know, they were all standing on the ground with a green screen. But but no, like a lot of this was done practically.
Yeah, a lot of it was. That was basically the intent from the beginning. To the, confusion of me, of Tom Harper basically saying, I want to do it all real. And I'm like, real, like it's going to look real, right? And he says, no, we're going to actually do it real. So, meaning we're going to build that balloon and we're going to really fly, we're going to put our actors up there. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's going to take a lot of insurance. Yeah, but we did it. So that mammoth, that 80-foot giant balloon, is the first of its kind that was built flight-worthy in 4 decades. And the guy who built it's a guy named Per Lindström, who was one of the people who, along with Richard Branson, attempted the flight around the world in the balloon. So there are a few balloon experts who ended up figuring out how to do this. Anyways, I lost my train of thought, but that...
What's pretty shocking about it is that took place 150 years ago.
That's amazing.
And look where we are today in flight. It's insane. And the balloonists that actually did it got up to 38,000 feet without oxygen. Crazy.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say. The mixture between how we really filmed it and what we did on stage, there was a lot of this stuff that was filmed for real. So that shot was for real. The shot where that David mentioned earlier of Amelia climbing on the side of the balloon and summiting basically the balloon, that was a combination of how we filmed that, of some stage work, some visual effects, but that was also a real shot of our stunt person named Helen Bailey, who's extraordinary. We put her into the air 2,000 feet, and that's really a human being climbing on the side of that balloon, standing on top 2,000 feet in the air. It was terrifying to watch.
Felicity's character, Amelia, is actually kind of an amalgam of, like, I believe 3 specific women, whereas Eddie's character is a real person. But I think it's so great that you wanted to include this female point of view. Can you kind of talk to that?
Yeah, it was important. Look, the real flight was James Glacier and a gentleman named Henry Coxwell. And the both of them are scientists. So in the real story, they went up to 37,000 feet. There was hypoxia. They had lots of problems along the way. But for the most of the flight, it was basically, as recorded, them kind of giving data to each other. And there weren't disparate points of view. So that didn't create much drama. So the idea was, let's take that flight as the basis for something to put a movie story together from, and take the best of an amalgamation of some of the best actions from those different flights of those early days, along with an amalgamation of some of the great female pilots of the day. So a young woman named Sophie Blanchard, who was a pilot in France in the late 1700s, who actually died tragically on a balloon flight because she was lighting fireworks off, as we depict in the film, and the fireworks caught fire on top of her balloon, and she tragically plunged to her death. A woman named Margaret Graham, and then of course Amelia Earhart.
I figured that's where the name came from. You guys might have already answered this. I mean, you're talking about the amazing practical effects, but what did end up being the biggest challenge of making this movie? Every film has its own set of challenges, from financing to all the way through to editing and marketing. What would you point to as sort of your biggest challenge?
I mean, I think that as I've mentioned before, the authenticity of feel and making sure that what we're portraying is as real as humanly possible, specifics to the flight. But I think that kind of goes across all disciplines here, and each department was tasked and kind of bought into the idea of let's do it for real. So, from the camera department creating their own rigs and designing their own rigs to make it feel like we were actually in the air, to the costume department literally going and buying fabrics from 1860s and constructing costumes from the true fabrics of the day, to the production design and their research and kind of everything about the authenticity of it, to, of course, the performers. We mentioned that Eddie and Felicity went up in that air for real. But even when they weren't up there, they were putting themselves in situations where it was real. So the scenes where they were frozen, we had a stage that was built that was below freezing temperature, where there were buckets of ice set around the stage. They would walk in, they would take their jackets off, they would get to the place where they were cold, they would put their hands in the buckets of ice, and they would be freezing, and then they'd start acting. So they didn't act cold, they were cold. And that was basically the entire idea of what this movie was.
I think with every movie, whether it's The Fighter or this or Beauty and the Beast, one of the great challenges is doing the research and finding the authenticity that exists. For The Fighter, it was just that world of Lowell, Massachusetts, and what it was really like. For Beauty and the Beast, it was the French at that period of time. For this, and I think that's one of the exciting things about movie making, is delving into the reality and then creating the movie from that.
And sometimes it goes really well, and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, the scene there with the butterflies, we made the strategic mistake of calling a butterfly wrangler and asking them to breed 5,000 butterflies for us. And so they bred 5,000 butterflies, but because the temperature and the summer was so hot, I think they're called pupae, had a hard time developing. So when the butterfly wrangler came with all of his butterflies, and we had this stage set where the butterflies were going to fly around, there were about 20 of them, and they were really, really tired, and they didn't like flying. So what remains in that scene of the butterflies is one butterfly when it lands on the finger. That's a real butterfly. That's real. So we had this guy who was in a blue suit, who was running around with a thing like, "Come on, butterflies!" And the actors were like pretending that the butterflies, and there's some real ones. But yeah, one remains. The rest are VFX.
I will take some questions from the audience. If you have one, just raise your hand. We'll try to do it like a speaker. What cut from the final version of the film?
There were a couple. There weren't a lot. I mean, as you can imagine, an editorial on this, because it's kind of a back and forth puzzle, we spent a lot of time figuring out where the flashback scenes go to hand off back to the present, to back to the past, and how both of those stories play simultaneously. There weren't a lot of scenes that were cut. We ended up having Charles Green and the Tim McInerney character as slightly more antagonistic in part of it, and there was one scene where Tim McInerney's character pulls Eddie's character aside and basically says, "You're going no further, this is your station in life, like here's what you're gonna do." And so that was basically it. Other than that, we pretty much used everything we had.
Sure, right there.
What was the budget?
The budget.
I'm gonna ask you what the budget was. What do you think?
80 million.
How much?
We never talk about that.
No, I'll say it.
14.
You gonna?
How much? 14?
14?
14.
Which is butterfly
Wow,
budget.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
That's what it costs to build a balloon.
The budget was 39.
You're kidding. And how
Which
much
is
did you
pretty
guys-
good number for that movie. So that was net. That's net, right?
39 net. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how people quote.
So you
budgets,
get
right?
you get the tax benefit from shooting in London.
And how many shooting days did you have?
Well, we did it over the course of about 10 weeks.
Well, okay. Someone down here? Sure.
When you got a hold of the script, did you feel like there were any big changes you needed to make in order to put it to the screen? And what went into you guys shooting or depicting it out of linear order?
Choice to depict it out of linear order and, immediate changes you thought of when you got the script.
So when we actually got a very early draft of the script that wasn't ready. Jack was writing it on spec, and we knew that we were going to be a part of it. So when Jack gave us that script, we spent about another 8 months developing it with him. And I would say that the story as depicted here is basically the story that he had initially written. The details, some of them were changed. There was a part in the initial draft where some of the motivations of James's character were slightly different than the motivations here. And we felt from the very beginning that part of the thrill and the artistic challenge of this movie was how to tell those two stories simultaneously. And I find the idea of those flashbacks to kind of be, in its own way, a thrill. So the way they were portrayed in the original script, for the most part, is the way they're portrayed here, but a lot of the details were a little bit different.
Sure, right there in the middle.
Yeah. Who financed Felicity's training, and who decides what kind of training does the actors take?
Oh, good question. Yeah.
Finance.
So we had, when we had the script done and we had some artwork commissioned that depicted some of the vistas that we intended on portraying on film, we took the package out to the town. We had several suitors who wanted to buy it. Amazon, who ended up financing the movie, was the most passionate and kind of brought the most creative simpatico. So anything that was done from the moment they got involved was financed by Amazon. They were great creative partners for us. We ended up, in conjunction with some of the production team that we hired, finding the appropriate and best people to work with Felicity. Eddie had a movement coach, so some of the real specifics of how he organizes his instruments and how fast he moves. That was a movement coach that he used, of how people might have worked in that day. And the people that we found for Felicity, in terms of her acrobatic style, one of the guys that we hired was a gentleman named Adam Curley, who actually ran all of the stunts for us on Beauty and the Beast, and he did all the stunts here. So through his department came a lot of the way that she was choreographing herself.
There's another question right there. Sure.
Whose idea was it to change the Coxwell character in the book into the Amelia Wren character? When did that decision get made?
When was the decision made to turn Coxwell into this amalgam of these three remarkable women?
That was a decision that was made at the very, very inception of it, right at the beginning of the idea. Jack
and
Tom basically made that decision to say this is something that we felt was important, and we agreed, and I think it's the right move.
That's how the script came to us.
And one of the women she's based on really did lose her husband, correct? It's a
Yeah,
true story.
yeah, yes, Margaret Graham, it was Margaret, her husband I think was named Charles, and he jumped to his death to save her. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So all of the stories that are in this movie, in one way, shape, or form, with the exception of summiting the balloon at that height, happened in various flights around this time period. Someone did summit their balloon, just not at 37,000 feet.
Did you guys ever go up in a balloon to sort of get the ball?
Well, that was actually something that we also did from the beginning, and this was as directed from Tom, saying, again, hammering that idea of authenticity. Every one of the crew members, every one of us, went up in a balloon.
Wow.
Not all at once, obviously. But
I would have loved to have done it. I mean, the reason Todd's answering most of the questions, we split up our movies.
Yeah.
So he took the helm on this one, but I would have loved to have done it.
Don't you, ladies?
As a matter of fact, we have one right outside. You got to make it up, man. It's time.
Has anybody here been in one?
Really?
Oh my God, look at that.
That's more than I expected.
It's pretty wild, and actually what ended up happening was, because everyone went up in a balloon, I think each balloon ride had, 8 people in it, so 6 to 8 people. So we all went up separately, and you get the sense of what it feels like up there. So it allows for the creative energies to flow, and the moment you rise and you realize that you have nothing to kind of grab onto, and there's no windows like an airplane, it's absolutely terrifying.
I mean, you're literally in a wicker basket, aren't you?
Yeah.
Oh, no thank you.
And I will say, by the way, just as a story worth repeating, when Felicity and Eddie first went up in their flight, And we had done an extraordinary amount of paperwork and insurance and training, and I mean, every single thing got done to make sure that we could put our movie stars up in a balloon that there is no possible human way to pilot because it is literally dictated by the wind. So it's the two of them in a balloon, and what we call a pilot, and basically a pilot in a gas balloon is someone who essentially pulls a string to let the gas out top and throws sand out when you want to rise. It's really all based on ballast and weight. That's the pilot. So this balloon starts to rise, and we're all cheering, and we're like, I can't believe we got it done. This is amazing. The temperature had to be something certain. The wind had to be below 5 knots. And then all of a sudden, the pilot who's hiding down there, he's like, all right, Felicity, pull that rope. And I'm like, wait a second. She has to actually pilot the balloon? She has to do something? And they're already gone. And we had a WhatsApp and chase vehicles that were like chasing them all over the place to make sure, because who knows where the wind's gonna go? So they're like driving all over the place. We're on the app like, they better land safely. This is gonna be crazy. And so at a certain point, the cameras got what they needed and we finished filming, but the sound kept going. So on the WhatsApp thing, I'm reading in my trailer, I'm like, please land safely. And then I read, hard landing, checking on how they are. I'm like, oh, fuck. I quickly went to the sound, and I listened, and it was essentially, some of what's in there, this is true, some of what's in there is actual sound from when Eddie and Felicity crashed in their real landing in the crash in here. Because the pilot had them basically throw out too much sand and they had no sand left.
Oh my God. Well, I want to thank you for making this movie because it's the closest I will ever get to going up a hot air balloon. And it really did feel like it.
No, we do have one outside.